The old meeting hall fell silent as Commander Velox walked to the front. His heavy footsteps echoed in the large room. 20 young cadets sat straight in their chairs watching their instructor. The commander's missing left arm and the deep scars across his face told stories of many battles. His dark eyes looked tired, like someone who had seen too much. "Today we talk about humans," Velox said. His voice was rough and low. Several cadets shifted in their seats. Everyone in the galaxy had heard stories about humans, but most thought they were just tales to scare children. Cadet Zifan raised his hand. "Sir, are the human stories really true?" "They seem impossible." Velox turned his head toward the young alien. A bitter smile crossed his face. 20 years ago, I thought the same thing. I was a young officer like you. I believed our technology and numbers would always win. I believed wars followed rules." He paused and looked out the window at the peaceful sky. "The humans taught me otherwise." The commander moved to his desk and picked up a small metal piece. It was twisted and burned, barely recognizable as part of a weapon. This came from Kepler Station. My first battle with humans. I was a captain then, commanding 300 soldiers on the ship Dark Wind. The cadets leaned forward. Velox had never spoken about his war experiences before. Kepler Station was a small human outpost. Velox continued. Mining operation. Maybe 50 humans total. Our fleet had 12 ships and 3,000 soldiers. High Command said it would be easy. Take the station, capture the humans, move on to the next target. His voice grew darker. We expected them to surrender when they saw our ships. Velox walked between the rows of seats. The human commander was Captain Lee Do-Yun. Young man, maybe 30 years old. When we sent the surrender message, he laughed. Actually laughed. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Come and take it." The room was completely quiet now. Even the air system seemed to whisper more softly. "We started with standard attack patterns," Velox said. "Energy weapons aimed at their defenses. Their shields went down in minutes. Their weapons were old and weak. Everything looked normal." He stopped and touched his scarred face. "That's when things went wrong. The humans didn't run to shelter like normal people. They ran toward the mining equipment. Captain Lee Do-Hyun was shouting orders but not military commands. He was telling them about pressure tanks, cutting tools, and rock crushers. I didn't understand then." Cadet Zyphon looked confused. "Mining equipment, sir." "Yes," Velox nodded. While we prepared to land, the humans were turning their mine into a weapon. They took the big rock crushers and aimed them at our landing zones. They filled pressure tanks with explosive gas and buried them underground. They turned cutting lasers into artillery guns. The commander's voice became quieter. Corporal Park Min-soo was their demolitions expert. He wasn't trained for war. He was trained to blow up rocks safely. But he used that knowledge to create traps we'd never seen before. When our first landing party touched down, they walked into a nightmare. Velox showed the cadets the twisted metal piece again. This was part of my captain's armor. The humans had rigged the landing pad to explode upward, not sideways like a normal bomb, but straight up like a volcano. 50 of our best soldiers died in seconds. The young aliens looked shocked. Their textbooks never described anything like this. But that was just the beginning, Velox continued. Captain Lee Do-Yun split his people into small groups. They knew every tunnel, every room, every hidden passage in that mine. They moved like ghosts. We'd clear a room, move forward, and find our people dead behind us. The worst part was their weapons. They didn't just use what they had, they made new ones. They took metal pipes and filled them with explosive charges. They turned maintenance robots into moving bombs. They used industrial acid to eat through our armor. Velox sat on the edge of his desk. I remember one moment clearly. We found a human teenager. Couldn't have been more than 16 years old. She was trapped in a collapsed tunnel with a broken leg. Standard procedure, capture and question. But when my soldiers got close, she smiled and held up a small device. "What happened?" asked another cadet. The entire section of the mine collapsed. She had rigged the support beams while we were fighting above. She killed herself and 20 of our soldiers just to slow us down. Velox's voice was filled with old pain. A child chose to die rather than be captured. The commander stood up and walked to the window. We fought for 6 hours. 6 hours against 50 humans in a small mining station. We should have won in 30 minutes. Instead, we lost 200 soldiers and had to retreat. "But surely you came back with more forces?" Cadet Zyphon asked. Velox turned around. "We did. 3 days later, we returned with our entire battle group, 15 ships, 5,000 soldiers. He paused. The humans were gone. They had evacuated during the night. But they left us a message. A message? They had turned the entire asteroid into a bomb. When our ships got close, Captain Lee Do-yun triggered it from somewhere far away. The explosion destroyed 4 of our ships and damaged the rest. Even in retreat, they heard us. The room was deadly silent. The young cadets tried to understand what they were hearing. That was my introduction to human warfare, Velox said. I learned that humans don't follow our rules. They don't think like us. When we see a hopeless situation, we surrender. When humans see a hopeless situation, they find a way to make it hopeless for everyone. He walked back to the front of the room. Captain Lee Do-yun and his people weren't special forces. They weren't elite soldiers. They were miners, engineers, and maintenance workers. But when threatened, they became something else entirely. Velox picked up another object from his desk, a small tool used for mining repairs. The humans left this behind. It's just a simple repair tool. But Corporal Park Min-soo used tools like this to create explosives that our engineers still can't understand. The commander looked at each cadet individually. This is why we study human warfare, not because they were stronger than us, not because they had better technology, but because they refused to lose even when losing was the only logical choice. Tomorrow, Velox said, I'll tell you about the colony ship Harmony. You'll learn what happens when humans have months to prepare, and why an entire Catharan battle fleet ran from 50,000 civilians. The cadets left the room in silence, their minds full of questions and fears they had never felt before. They were beginning to understand why the galaxy still spoke of humans in whispered voices, 20 years after the war had ended. Commander Velox stood before the cadets again, but today his hands shook slightly. The young aliens noticed their instructor seemed more troubled than yesterday. Outside, dark clouds covered the sky, matching the mood in the classroom. Yesterday I told you about Kepler Station, Velox began. That was just the first lesson humans taught us. Today I will tell you about the colony ship Harmony and why I still wake up screaming sometimes. The cadets sat quietly, remembering the disturbing stories from the day before. They were no longer eager to hear about human warfare, but they needed to understand. The Harmony was huge, Velox continued. A civilian transport carrying 50,000 humans to a new world. Families, children, old people, doctors, teachers, normal citizens. When the war started, the ship was caught in empty space, too far from any military base to get help. Velox walked to the front window and stared outside. Our fleet found them after 3 months. The ship was damaged and drifting. No communications, no shields, no weapons. High Command ordered us to board and capture the civilians. They would be valuable prisoners. I was a major then, leading the boarding teams. We expected no resistance. After all, they were just civilians who had been trapped in space for months. They should have been grateful for rescue. The commander turned back to face his students. His scarred face looked older today. The ship's commander was Colonel Kim Ji-ho. Before the war, he had been a transport pilot. Quiet man who flew families to new homes. But 3 months in space had changed him. When we docked with their ship, everything seemed normal at first. The airlocks opened properly. The lights were working. But as soon as we stepped inside, we knew something was wrong. The air smelled strange. Sweet and chemical, like something was burning. Velox picked up a medical scanner from his desk. This belonged to Dr. Yu Hana, the ship's head doctor. Before the war, she saved lives. She helped children, fixed broken bones, delivered babies. He set the scanner down carefully. During those 3 months alone, she learned to take lives instead. The first corridor seemed empty. My soldiers moved forward in standard formation. Then the walls started bleeding. Bleeding, sir? Asked Cadet Ziphon. Not real blood. Some kind of chemical mixture that ate through our armor. Dr. Yu Hana had filled the wall panels with acid and set up pressure triggers. When we stepped on certain floor sections, the walls would spray death. Velox began pacing again. But that was just the beginning. The humans had turned their entire ship into a weapon. Every medical bay had been converted into a trap. Dr. Yu Hana had taken surgical robots and programmed them to attack instead of heal. She had turned X-ray machines into energy weapons. She had filled medical injectors with poison. The cadets looked horrified. The idea of doctors becoming killers disturbed them deeply. The worst part was the children's section, Velox said quietly. We expected to find scared families hiding in their rooms. Instead, we found Private Jang Hyun-woo. A private? On a civilian ship? He was 18 years old, maybe younger. just a kid who had been traveling with his family to start a new life. But those 3 months in space had made him into something else. Velox touched his missing arm. He did this to me. The room became very quiet. Jang Hyunwoo had taken over the children's play areas and turned them into a fortress. He used toys and games to make explosives. He used playground equipment to create barriers and traps. He had been alone in that section for weeks, protecting the younger children. Velox sat down heavily. When we found him, he had been awake for 3 days straight. His eyes were red and wild. He had lost weight, and his hands never stopped shaking, but he still fought like a demon. The boy had no formal military training, but he understood the ship better than anyone. He knew which panels could be removed, which pipes could be broken, which systems could be turned into weapons. He used the air vents to move around like a ghost. I led 20 soldiers against one teenager, Velox continued. It took us 6 hours to corner him. He killed 8 of my best fighters using nothing but improvised explosives and the ship's own systems. When we finally trapped him, he was laughing. Laughing. Crazy laughter. The kind that comes from too much fear and too little sleep. He looked at us with those wild eyes and said, "You want the children? Come and take them." Then he triggered his final trap. Velox held up his remaining hand. The explosion took my arm and killed 5 more soldiers. But it also sealed off the children's section completely. We never got through. Jang Hyunwoo died in that blast, but he saved every child on the ship. The commander stood up and walked to a wall display showing star charts. Engineering Chief Shin Woobin was even worse. He had taken apart the ship's engines and rebuilt them into something new. Not for travel, for war. The Harmony was supposed to be helpless, dead in space. But Chief Shin had secretly been modifying everything. He had turned the cargo bays into weapon factories. He had rewired the computer systems to create new kinds of traps. He had even modified the artificial gravity to crush intruders. I remember walking into what looked like an empty cafeteria. The tables and chairs were neatly arranged, like people had just stepped away for a moment. But Chief Shin had rigged the gravity controls. When my soldiers reached the center of the room, he increased gravity to 5 times normal. 3 of them were crushed instantly. Velox returned to his desk and picked up a small piece of machinery. This came from their food processing unit. Chief Shin had turned it into a bomb factory. They were making explosives from recycled air and food waste, turning the basic necessities of life into instruments of death. How long did the battle last? A cadet asked. 4 days, Velox replied. 4 days to capture 1 damaged civilian ship. We lost 300 soldiers. The humans lost maybe 50 fighters, but they weren't really fighters. They were doctors, engineers, teachers, and children who had learned to kill because they had no choice. But you won in the end? Velox shook his head slowly. We captured the ship, yes. But we didn't win. Colonel Kim Ji-ho had one final surprise. While we were fighting in the corridors, he had been preparing the ship's reactor for overload. He was going to destroy his own people? No, Velox said quietly. He was going to destroy all of us. Kim Ji-ho gave us a choice. Leave his ship immediately or everyone dies together. He meant it. The reactor readings showed he was serious, so we left. We took our dead and wounded and retreated. 50,000 human civilians had defeated our entire boarding force. They kept their freedom, and we learned another lesson about human warfare. Velox walked back to the window. The dark clouds were getting thicker. Dr. Yu Hana sent us a message as we pulled away. She said, "Thank you for teaching us what we're capable of. Next time will be even worse." Next time? She was right. The Harmony eventually reached human space and shared everything they had learned. Their improvised weapons, their trap designs, their psychological warfare techniques. They turned survival into a science. The commander faced his students again. This is the second lesson about humans. When they cannot run and cannot hide, they adapt. They take whatever they have and turn it into what they need. Doctors become soldiers. Children become warriors. Civilian ships become battlefields. But the most frightening thing, Velox said as he gathered his teaching materials, is that they remember every technique we used against them, every weakness they discovered in themselves, every innovation born from desperation. They remember it all and make it better. Tomorrow, he told the cadets, I will tell you about Lieutenant Cho Sung-min and how one broken human turned an asteroid field into a graveyard for an entire battle fleet. You will learn why we stopped hunting human survivors. The young aliens left the classroom in silence once again. But this time several of them looked back at Commander Velox with new understanding. They were beginning to realize that their instructor wasn't just teaching them about human warfare. He was warning them about something that still gave him nightmares even 20 years later. Outside, the dark clouds finally opened, and cold rain began to fall on the academy grounds. The third day brought clear skies, but Commander Velox looked worse than ever. His remaining hand trembled as he placed his teaching materials on the desk. The cadets noticed dark circles under his eyes as if he hadn't slept at all. "Some of you asked me yesterday why we stopped hunting human survivors," Velox began. His voice was hoarse and tired. "Today you will understand. Today I tell you about the ghost that haunts asteroid belt 7. The young aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their instructor seemed different today, more fragile, more afraid. "I was Admiral Velox then," he continued. "Youngest admiral in Catharan history. I commanded the 3rd Battle Fleet, 40 ships and 15,000 soldiers. High Command gave me a simple mission: destroy the human research station in asteroid belt 7 and eliminate all survivors." Velox walked to the star chart on the wall and pointed to a distant system. The research station was small, maybe 200 humans studying asteroid minerals. When we arrived, the station was already damaged from earlier attacks. Our sensors showed massive explosions had torn it apart, but one life sign remained. One human survivor hiding somewhere in the asteroid field. High Command ordered us to find him and finish the job. How hard could it be? One human against an entire battle fleet. The commander's bitter laugh filled the room. The survivor was Lieutenant Cho Seungmin. Before the war, he had been a geological survey specialist. He studied rocks and minerals, mapped asteroid fields, analyzed ore samples. A quiet scientist who probably never held a weapon before the fighting started. Velox returned to his desk and picked up a small rock sample. It looked ordinary, gray stone with metallic flecks. This came from Belt 7. Lieutenant Cho had been studying asteroids like this for 3 years before we arrived. He knew every rock, every mineral composition, every structural weakness in that field. We started the hunt with confidence. Velox continued. Our best tracking ship spread out through the asteroid field. We had sensors that could detect a human heartbeat from a kilometer away. We had weapons that could vaporize entire asteroids. One human couldn't hide for long. The commander paused, staring at the rock sample. We were wrong. Cho Seungmin wasn't hiding. He was hunting us. Hunting you, sir. The first ship we lost was the destroyer Sharp Edge. It was investigating a large asteroid where our sensors detected movement. The captain reported finding old mining equipment and some kind of shelter built into the rock. Velox set down the sample carefully. Then the asteroid exploded. Cho had turned the entire rock into a mine. Not a normal explosive mine, something much worse. He had identified the asteroid's structural flaws and placed charges at exactly the right points. When it exploded, the fragments became projectiles moving at incredible speed. The Sharp Edge was destroyed instantly, but that wasn't the end. The asteroid fragments spread out in a pattern that damaged 3 other ships. One human had taken out 4 vessels with one carefully planned explosion. Velox began pacing, his footsteps echoing in the quiet room. We thought it was luck, a desperate survivor getting one good hit before we captured him, so we continued the search with more caution. The second attack came 3 days later. Our patrol ship Night Hunter was moving through a narrow passage between large asteroids. Suddenly, the rocks on both sides started moving. Cho had somehow attached engines to the asteroids and was using them to crush our ship. Engines, sir. Salvaged from the destroyed research station. Lieutenant Cho had spent weeks moving through the wreckage collecting anything useful. He found thruster units, power cells, computer systems, and tools. Then he used his knowledge of asteroid composition to attach them in ways we never expected. The commander stopped pacing and faced his students. But the worst part wasn't the attack itself. It was what we found when we investigated the wreckage. Cho had left messages carved into the asteroid walls. Messages? Coordinates. Mathematical equations. Detailed analyses of our ship movements and attack patterns. He wasn't just surviving, he was studying us. Learning our tactics, predicting our next moves, planning counters for everything we tried. Velox's voice grew quieter. We realized we weren't hunting a desperate survivor anymore. We were fighting someone who had turned the entire asteroid field into his weapon and laboratory. Scout Nam Taewoo was our best tracker. He had served in special operations for 10 years, could find anyone anywhere. I sent him with a small team to locate Cho while the main fleet stayed at safe distance. The commander picked up another object from his desk, a communication device, old and battle-damaged. This was Scout Nam's last transmission. He had found Cho's main hideout, a hollowed-out asteroid with life support and workshop facilities. Nam reported that he was moving in to capture the target. What happened to Scout Nam? The asteroid was a trap. Cho had been expecting us to send our best tracker. He had prepared something special. Velox activated the communication device and static-filled voices emerged. "Admiral, this is Nam. I'm inside the asteroid. It's incredible what this human has built. Workshops, laboratories, living quarters carved right into the rock. He's been here for months preparing." The transmission continued. "Wait, I'm seeing movement. Multiple contacts. But that's impossible. Sensors showed only one human life sign." Then Nam's voice became confused and frightened. "Admiral, these aren't humans. They're mechanical. Robot copies. Dozens of them. All looking like Cho Sung-min. I can't tell which one is real." The final part of the message was chaos. Weapons fire, explosions, and Nam's terrified voice. "He's everywhere. Every robot has his memories, his knowledge. They're all him. They're all working together. Admiral, get the fleet away from here." It's all a trap. The whole asteroid field is then silence. Velox turned off the device. We never heard from Scout Nam again. But 2 hours later, asteroids throughout the entire field began moving. Cho had rigged hundreds of them with engines and guidance systems. Our safe distance wasn't safe anymore. Over the next week, Lieutenant Cho Sung-min systematically destroyed my fleet. He used asteroids as missiles, fired from impossible angles with perfect accuracy. He created debris fields that damaged our engines when we tried to retreat. He even used the asteroid belt's natural gravity to redirect our own weapons back at us. The commander sat down heavily. The worst moment came when we captured one of his robot duplicates. We thought we finally had him, but when we examined the machine, we found something horrible. What did you find? It wasn't just a robot. It was a perfect copy of his mind, loaded with all his memories and knowledge, and this copy was insane. The real Cho had been alone for so long, had seen so much death and destruction, that his mind had broken. But his brilliance remained intact. The robot copy laughed at us. It told us exactly how it was going to destroy our remaining ships, gave us detailed plans for attacks we couldn't prevent. It explained how the real Cho had studied our previous battles and knew exactly how we would respond to every situation. Belloc stood up and walked to the window. On the 10th day, I had only 12 ships left from my original 40. I made the hardest decision of my military career. I ordered a full retreat. You retreated from one human? Yes. One human who had turned an asteroid field into a fortress of death. One human who had created an army of himself. One human who knew our tactics better than we did and had prepared counters for everything we might try. The commander turned back to his students. As we fled, Lieutenant Cho Seung-min sent us a final message. Not a threat or a victory speech. Just 7 words. Thank you for the tactical training exercises. Training exercises? He had been using our attacks to test his defenses and improve his methods. Every ship we lost taught him something new about our capabilities. Every tactic we tried gave him data for better counters. We thought we were hunting him, but he was studying us. Velox returned to his desk and gathered his materials. Lieutenant Cho Seung-min was eventually found by a human rescue ship 3 months after we retreated. He was barely alive, starving, dehydrated, and completely insane. But he had held Asteroid Belt 7 against an entire battle fleet for 6 months using nothing but rocks and salvaged equipment. What happened to him? The humans put him in a medical facility for treatment, but they also gave him a medal and a promotion. They studied everything he had done, learned from his innovations, and added his techniques to their military training programs. The commander looked at each cadet individually. This is the 3rd lesson about humans. When they are alone and outnumbered, they don't give up. They adapt their environment to fight for them. They turn their knowledge into weapons. And they remember everything you teach them, even if you're trying to kill them while you teach it. But most importantly, Velox added as the cadets prepared to leave, they refused to go quietly. Lieutenant Cho could have hidden until we gave up searching. Instead, he chose to hurt us as much as possible, even though he knew he would probably die in the process. Tomorrow, he told them, I will tell you the worst story of all, about the day humans armed their own children, and why our empire decided that some victories are too terrible to achieve. The young aliens filed out of the classroom, their minds struggling to process what they had learned. Outside, the clear sky seemed somehow less peaceful than before, as if danger could come from Commander Velox did not come to class on the fourth day. Instead, he sent a message saying he needed time to prepare for the most difficult story. The cadets waited anxiously, wondering what could be worse than the tales they had already heard. When Velox finally appeared on the fifth day, he looked like he had aged 10 years. His remaining hand shook constantly now, and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. He carried a small wooden box that he set carefully on his desk. "I almost didn't tell you this story," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Some things are too dark to share, but you need to understand what humans will do when they face complete extinction." The cadets sat in absolute silence. Even the building's air system seemed quieter today. New Busan was an agricultural world, Velox continued. 2 million human civilians growing food for their colonies. Farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, children. No military bases, no weapons factories, no strategic value except for the crops they grew. He opened the wooden box and removed a small toy spaceship, painted bright blue with childish decorations. This belonged to Han Min-seok. He was 14 years old and loved building model ships. His dream was to become a real pilot someday and explore the galaxy. Velox set the toy down gently. When our invasion force arrived at New Busan, we expected immediate surrender. The humans had no warships, no defensive systems, no trained soldiers, just civilians trying to protect their families and their farms. The planetary commander was General Bei Jion. Before the war, she had been a logistics coordinator. She organized food shipments and supply deliveries. A desk officer who had never commanded troops in battle. The commander walked to the star chart and pointed to a small world in human space. High Command gave our fleet simple orders: capture the farms intact, relocate the humans to work camps, secure the food production for our empire. Clean and efficient, but General Bai Jian refused to surrender. She sent us a message that still gives me nightmares. "These are our homes, our children, our future. We will not be moved. We will not be enslaved. Come if you must, but know that every step will cost you blood." Velox returned to his desk and picked up another object from the box, a small military jacket, sized for a child. This belonged to Lim So-young. She was 16 years old, still in school, learning about literature and mathematics. She had never even seen a real weapon before the invasion. When our landing ships descended, we expected to find civilians hiding in shelters. Instead, we found children in fighting positions. Boys and girls who should have been studying for exams were carrying weapons and explosives. The cadets looked horrified. The idea of child soldiers disturbed every civilized species in the galaxy. General Bei had made the hardest choice any commander can make, Velox continued. She knew her adult population couldn't stop our invasion. So she did something that still haunts military academies across the galaxy. She armed the children. But why would the children fight? Because they understood what capture meant. General Bei didn't lie to them or promise easy victory. She explained exactly what would happen if we won. Their parents sent to work camps, their homes destroyed, their culture erased. The children chose to fight rather than accept that future. Velox's voice became even quieter. Lim So-young became a pilot. The humans had converted their civilian aircraft into fighters, crop dusters with missiles, transport planes with bombs. These machines were not built for combat, but desperation makes everything into a weapon. I watched her first attack run from the command deck of our flagship. A teenage girl in a converted farming plane flying straight at our battlecruiser. Our weapons officers were laughing. One small aircraft against a warship seemed like a joke. But So-young wasn't trying to destroy our ship. She was carrying a special payload that the humans had developed, a virus that could infect our computer systems. Her plane was destroyed by our defenses, but not before she transmitted the virus to our networks. The commander paused, staring at the child-sized jacket. Within hours, our ships were experiencing system failures. Navigation errors, weapon malfunctions, communication breakdowns. A 16-year-old girl had crippled our entire fleet with one suicide run. But that was just the beginning. Young Han Min-seok, the boy who loved model spaceships, had become something else entirely. General Bei discovered he had a gift for tactical planning that rivaled our best military strategists. Velox removed another item from the box, a hand-drawn map covered with symbols and calculations. This is Han's battle plan for the defense of Greenfield Valley. Look at it carefully. The cadets examined the map. Despite being drawn by a child, It showed sophisticated understanding of terrain, troop movements, and tactical positioning. Han Min-seok had analyzed our previous invasion tactics and identified weaknesses we didn't even know we had. He predicted exactly where we would land, which routes we would take, and how we would position our forces. Then he planned counters for everything. A 14-year-old child outsmarted our generals completely. Han had spent his free time studying military history and strategy games. When war came to his world, he applied that knowledge to real combat. He organized the other children into squads, taught them guerrilla tactics, and coordinated attacks that consistently surprised our forces. Velox walked back to the window, but he didn't look outside. His eyes stared at something only he could see. The worst battle happened at Riverside School. Squad leader Oh Dong-yun was 17 years old, captain of his school's athletics team. He led 30 children against 200 of our elite soldiers. The children had turned their school into a fortress. They used classroom desks as barriers, science equipment as weapons, art supplies to make explosives. Oh Dong-yun had divided them into teams based on their school subjects. The chemistry students made bombs, the physics students built traps, the engineering students designed defenses. We surrounded the school expecting quick surrender. Instead, we found ourselves in the longest, bloodiest battle of the entire invasion. Those children fought like demons, using every room, every corridor, every piece of equipment as part of their defense. The commander's voice broke slightly. Oh Dong-yun held the main hallway for 6 hours. Just him and 5 other teenagers against wave after wave of our soldiers. When we finally broke through, we found him still standing, still fighting, even though he had been wounded multiple times. He looked at us with these defiant eyes and said, "You want our school? You want our future? Then you'll have to kill us all." And he meant it. Every single child in that building was prepared to die rather than surrender. Velox returned to his desk and carefully placed all the items back in the wooden box. The battle for New Busan lasted 3 months. 3 months of fighting children who refused to give up, who turned playgrounds into battlefields and schools into fortresses. We lost 15,000 soldiers taking one agricultural world. 15,000 of our best fighters killed by children who were protecting their homes and families. But the humans lost too, observed a cadet. Yes, Velox nodded sadly. They lost 30,000 children. Teenagers who should have lived long, peaceful lives. Boys and girls who should have become doctors, teachers, artists, explorers. All dead because we forced them to choose between slavery and death. And the survivors? The children who lived through the battle were changed forever. Lim So-young became a pilot instructor, teaching other young humans how to turn civilian aircraft into weapons. Han Min-seok joined the Human Military Academy and revolutionized their tactical training. Oh Dong-yun became a commando leader, specializing in defensive operations. The humans gave them medals and honors, but they also gave them something else, positions of authority in their war effort. The galaxy's youngest military advisors, all of them veterans of battles that should never have happened. Velox closed the wooden box and locked it carefully. This is the 4th lesson about humans. When they face extinction, they will sacrifice everything, even their children's innocence. They will turn schools into battlefields and teenagers into soldiers, not because they want to, but because the alternative is worse. But the real lesson, he added, is what this does to the humans who survive. Every child we forced to fight became an adult who understood exactly how far humans will go to protect what they love. They became the teachers, leaders, and strategists of the next generation. General Bai Ji-yeon sent us a final message before she died in the last battle for New Busan. "You have taught our children how to kill. Now they will teach their children. Congratulations, you have created your own worst enemy." The commander looked at his students with tired, sad eyes. "Tomorrow I will tell you the final story, about the moment when our empire realized that some victories are too terrible to achieve, and why we decided that peace was the only way to survive." As the cadets filed out, several of them looked back at the wooden box on Velox's desk. They were beginning to understand that their instructor wasn't just teaching them about military tactics. He was sharing the burden of memories that had haunted him for 20 years, and warning them about the price of forcing civilized beings to become monsters. On the final day, Commander Velox arrived early and stood silently at the window for a long time. When the cadets entered, they found him staring at the distant horizon with an expression they had never seen before. Not just sadness or fear, but something deeper. Regret. "Today I tell you why the war ended," he said without turning around. "Not because we couldn't win, but because we realized what winning would cost us all." The cadets took their seats quietly. After 4 days of disturbing stories, they had learned to listen carefully to every word their instructor spoke. Emperor Thalnox called it the final solution. Velox began. "Complete extermination of the human species. No prisoners, no work camps, no mercy. Every human world burned, every human ship destroyed, every human life ended." He finally turned from the window, and the student saw tears in his old eyes. The Emperor had become afraid. "The stories I've told you over the past days, they were happening everywhere, on every front of the war. Humans were teaching us that victory against them required methods that destroyed the souls of the victors." Velox walked to his desk, but today there were no objects from the past, no mementos of old battles, just empty space and silence. The largest fleet in galactic history assembled for the final assault. 2,000 ships, 50 battle stations, 1,000,000 soldiers. Every major species contributed forces. The humans would not survive this time. But the human fleet was tiny by comparison. Admiral Ryu Jungwon commanded maybe 300 ships and 100,000 soldiers. On paper, they had no chance of victory. In reality, they had no intention of fighting a conventional battle. The commander sat down heavily in his chair. Admiral Ryu had been a transport coordinator before the war, like so many human officers who were forced into military roles. He understood logistics, supply chains, and civilian evacuation procedures, skills that seemed useless for warfare. When our combined fleet arrived at the final human stronghold system, we expected to find their remaining forces arranged in defensive positions around their homeworld. Instead, we found something that violated every rule of civilized warfare. Velox paused as if gathering courage to continue. The humans had turned their entire civilian population into combatants. Not just the children like on New Busan. Everyone. Elderly people, disabled citizens, pregnant mothers, newborn babies, all of them armed and prepared to fight. Surely they couldn't make effective soldiers from such people. That's what we thought. But Admiral Ryu hadn't turned them into soldiers. He had turned them into something worse, living weapons who chose their own targets and timing. The commander stood and began pacing, but his movements were slower today, more tired. Specialist Koyunji was 90 years old, confined to a mobility chair, legally blind from age-related disease. Before the war, she had been a computer programmer who helped design civilian networks. When our fleet began the final assault, our command systems started experiencing impossible failures. Navigation computers would suddenly reverse course corrections. Weapon systems would target our own ships instead of human vessels. Communication networks would broadcast human propaganda instead of military orders. Koyunji had spent months infiltrating our computer systems through captured equipment and intercepted signals. A 90-year-old woman in a wheelchair had turned our own technology against us, and she did it while under constant bombardment from our advanced forces. Velox stopped pacing and gripped the back of his chair. But Koyunji wasn't working alone. The humans had connected their entire civilian population into a single cyber warfare network. Thousands of elderly programmers, disabled engineers, and retired technicians, all working together to sabotage our fleet from the inside. Children too young to hold weapons were running communication relays. Adults too sick to fight were managing supply databases and tracking our ship movements. Pregnant mothers were coordinating evacuation routes while simultaneously hacking our reconnaissance systems. The cadets sat in stunned silence. The idea of an entire population weaponized for warfare was beyond their understanding. Commander An Giseok was running the evacuation operations, Velox continued, a logistics expert who had never commanded combat troops. His job was supposed to be simple: get civilian refugees to safety while the military fought the final battle. Instead, Commander An turned the evacuation into a weapon of war. Every refugee ship was equipped with cyber warfare systems, communications jammers, and sensor decoys. The fleeing civilians became a massive intelligence network that tracked our movements and reported our positions to human commanders. But the most horrifying part was what they did with their children. Not armed them for combat, but something else entirely. They programmed the youngest ones with complete technical knowledge of our ships, our weapons, our tactical procedures. Velox's voice became a whisper. Children as young as 5 years old were carrying detailed information about how to sabotage our most advanced systems. If any of them were captured, they could provide intelligence that would cost us thousands of lives. The humans had turned their own babies into military assets, not by giving them weapons but by making them living libraries of our weaknesses and vulnerabilities. The commander returned to the window, staring out at the peaceful sky. Emperor Thalnox realized what was happening when our casualties reached 200,000 in the first week of the final assault. We weren't fighting an army anymore. We were fighting an entire species that had chosen mutual destruction over surrender. Dr. Choi Ji-hwan was their final surprise, a medical researcher who specialized in genetic diseases. When we captured him during a raid on their medical facilities, we thought we had taken a valuable prisoner who might provide intelligence about human biology. Instead, Dr. Choi told us something that ended the war immediately. He explained that the humans had developed a genetic virus that would spread through contact with any alien species, not immediately lethal but designed to make reproduction impossible. He was lying, of course. No such weapon existed. But Dr. Choi presented the threat so convincingly, with such detailed scientific data, that our own medical experts believed it was real. The possibility that defeating humans might mean the end of all galactic civilization terrified our leadership. Velox turned back to his students. But the real terror wasn't the imaginary virus. It was the realization that humans were willing to create such a weapon, that they would choose to end all life in the galaxy rather than accept defeat. President Moon Soo-jin delivered the final message that ended the war. She didn't threaten us with superior weapons or military tactics. She simply promised that humans would never stop fighting, never accept occupation, never surrender completely. Her exact words were, "You can kill every human in the galaxy, but you cannot kill the idea of humanity. We have taught that idea to our computers, our machines, our artificial intelligences. They will continue the fight long after we are gone, and they will teach it to others." The commander sat down again, looking older than his years. Emperor Thalnox realized that victory over humans would require the complete destruction of everything they had built, everyone they had influenced, and every idea they had shared. The cost would be the end of galactic civilization itself. So we sued for peace, not because we couldn't win, but because winning would mean becoming something worse than we had ever been. The humans had shown us what total war really meant, and we decided we didn't want to learn that lesson. Velox looked at each cadet individually. This is the final lesson about humans. They don't fight to win. They fight to make sure that defeating them costs more than any victory is worth. They turn warfare into a choice between coexistence and mutual destruction. The peace treaty we signed 20 years ago wasn't about territory or resources. It was about survival, theirs and ours. We agreed to leave them alone, and they agreed not to teach the rest of the galaxy what they had learned about total warfare. The commander stood up slowly. Admiral Ryu Jung-hwan, Specialist Ko Eun-ji, Commander An Gi-seok, Dr. Choi Ji-won, President Moon Soo-jin. They saved both our species by showing us the abyss we were all approaching. They made us understand that some victories are too terrible to achieve. As the cadets prepared to leave, Velox spoke one final time. Remember these stories, but don't hate the humans for what they did. They fought the way they did because we forced them to choose between freedom and extinction. In the same situation, any of us might have made the same choices. The humans are not our enemies anymore, but they are not our friends either. They are something else. A reminder of what intelligent beings become when they have no choice but to fight for their very existence. The young aliens left the classroom for the last time, their minds full of questions about warfare, morality, and the terrible prices that civilizations pay for their conflicts. They had learned more than military history in those 5 days. They had learned about the darkness that exists in every intelligent species when survival is at stake. Outside, the peaceful sky stretched endlessly above the academy, and the cadets wondered if they would ever look at it the same way again.